Hello, viewers and Final Fantasy fans alike. My name is Chris, or you can refer to me by my YouTube channel name, Mimic Warrior Artist. After playing the Final Fantasy VII Remake, let's just say I had some pretty mixed feelings. There were things I absolutely loved, and there were things that I didn't love or hated. I checked out many reviews and videos to see what others thought, and I was pretty surprised to see many people accepting the changes, though many people were also worried about the developers going too far off course from the original in Part 2. There are a number of things I wanted to add to the conversation that I felt were valid to bring up, especially since I wasn't hearing other people talk about it. But I also wanted to re-examine and go through the game again to see if my thoughts would change and to examine things in the game that I might have missed. I also want to clearly highlight the things I loved about this game and be fair in my criticism. This will be a combination of an analysis and a personal review. Yes, I will make comparisons to the original. I mean, if you're going to slap a brand name like Final Fantasy VII Remake on something, what the heck do you expect? I think it's completely fair to do so, even if they did make it clear that there would be changes. I'm also going to cut it up into chapters. This will enable me to focus in on each section or sector of the game and replay the sections to see how my experience changes. I won't be playing the original alongside this one, as fixating on every little detail is not important. This isn't a one-to-one remake, obviously. The important details are the things that were central to the core of what Final Fantasy VII is. I'm hoping to share what I believe the core, heart, or spirit of Final Fantasy VII is in the process. In this video, though, I'm only going to be covering the opening video. To quickly give a little background on where I'm coming from, Final Fantasy VII was not my introduction to JRPGs, unlike many people. But Final Fantasy IV and Secret of Mana for the Super Nintendo were. Ever since those games, I've always been into JRPGs. It's the stories and art that drew me into those games. Plus, I've always loved fantasy stories. I'm sure I watched my friend play Final Fantasy VII, but I don't remember a lot about it. Anything specific anyways. I believe I got especially into Final Fantasy VIII, as that game did have better graphics. Final Fantasy VII, in comparison, had people with paintbrush arms. While watching my friend play was entertaining, due to the CG movie cutscenes, it actually took me a while to get into Final Fantasy VII. But once I got past Disc 1, I was hooked. Final Fantasy VII definitely had a stylistic cool factor to it, but it also had genuine heart and meaning behind its awkward polygons and plenty of attention to detail. That genuine heart and meaning is what imbued everything in the game with life. It feels like a living story and world, like The Lord of the Rings, where every element of the game, even the materia system and combat, ties back into the story. In other words, what's important to me is the story and the design of the different elements to help tell, and for you to experience that story. It's also important to me that the impact a story has on someone to be one that makes us better people, though that is of course partially dependent on the person. I've yet to figure out what my favorite game of all time is, but I do consider Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy X, and Final Fantasy Tactics all my top favorites of the Final Fantasy series, due to the depth of storytelling and world building they accomplish, alongside the art and music. So, in other words, it's up there as one of my favorite games. I like it more than Star Wars. The Final Fantasy series is one of my favorite video game series. When I heard about how they were going to handle this remake, I was on board with most of it. I liked the idea of adding and deepening this game. I was of the opinion that it should have included more than just Midgar, but I had no problems with the episodic format, or that it was going to be an action game. My primary concern was the strategic combat and that the story would be true to the heart of the original, including, of course, the characters. In other words, the feel of the story that is communicated through all the elements. To me, that is what makes the Final Fantasy games special. So without further ado, on to the review. Part 0, the opening. When you start a new game in Final Fantasy VII Remake, you see a beautifully rendered view of a desert and mountainous area fills your vision. We see a black bird fly into view. It flies off camera, then back on towards a distant city. It's obvious, it's the city of Midgar. The camera switches to an overhead view of the bird flying over metal pipes, construction, and stairs. Then into the mist or fog. When the fog clears, we see the shiny modern city of Midgar on the top plate. It looks like other world-famous cities, like Vancouver or New York or perhaps Tokyo. Cars, highways, and skyscrapers galore. The camera pans below the highway. We see a street with a cafe and Steven's restaurant sign. People are walking the street. Switch to a camera pan street level, showing kids riding their bikes, and a construction vehicle in the background. We see a mechanic working on a car, and a guy lifting fuel tanks or cylinders into the back of a vehicle. Could they be Mako fuel? A dog gets into a trash can. A close-up of the construction vehicle putting something down as kids on their bikes speed past. The camera follows them, and we see a familiar park from the original. A vehicle drives by a dried-up plant on the side of the road. We see kids playing at the familiar playground. One of the girls playing at the playground turns to look at a Mako reactor. We get a close-up of her eye. Okay, swear. Now you guys are just showing off. The camera pans up and shows us a Mako reactor with glowing Mako energy on top of it. All these scenes beautifully establish Midgar as a more shiny and modern, but still lived-in city. Anybody who lives in a city or near one would feel right at home here. The level of detail is staggering here. This is something you'll probably hear me go on and on about throughout this entire review series. The art is just absolutely amazing and spectacular in this game. Definitely one of the big draws to this game, and one of the reasons why this kind of fulfills the dream come true of having Final Fantasy VII in 3D. Like, you could literally stop the camera, or pause it somehow every 5 seconds and notice, like, all these little details. While great art does not necessarily make the best game a masterpiece when it comes to games or movies, it's definitely a big part of it, and it should definitely not go unrecognized. Fans will recognize the park from the game. It does look a little different. The movie then transitions to a near exact recreation of the opening scene in Final Fantasy VII. Either stars or dots of energy, then to Aerith, eyes closed, near a Mako fissure of some sort in a pipe. We see her open her eyes. I don't think I even have to say how beautiful she looks and the level of detail in this scene. She senses something, gets up, and hurriedly starts walking out of the back street. She accidentally bumps into someone walking down the street, causing her to drop some of her flowers. She bends down to pick them up and manages to pick up most of them, but unfortunately, a guy steps on the last one. The guy is carrying a box, so either he doesn't see her or doesn't care. We get a close-up of the foot stepping on the flower, meaning they wanted to draw our attention to this. Aerith doesn't protest, but simply picks it up and cups it with both hands, bringing it closer to her, like a treasure or a dear pet. A brief closing of her eyes and a sigh. This little situation in the scene wasn't in the original, but it clearly shows something about her character. The man represents the apathy or blindness of most people in that city of Midgar. It's quite familiar to many of us. Aerith, on the other hand, treasures these natural flowers, but she doesn't get angry at the man. Her closed eyes at the Mako fissure suggest that there is a spiritual nature to her. The way she looks up also seems to suggest that she sees the bigger picture of things. The camera focuses on her face as Aerith looks up into the sky from a kneeling position. The camera zooms out from her face all the way until you see the entirety of the city of Midgar. The title of the game flashes on the screen. It follows to a quick cut of the wheels of a running train, then back to the wide shot of Midgar as it slowly zooms in. Another quick cut, and a different shot of the train rushing by. Back to Midgar, zooming in faster, past the Shinra building. Another quick cut to the front of the train. Cut back to the Midgar, zooming in. On the same train coming into the station. It zooms into Cloud, kneeling on top of the train, his huge, recognizable Buster Sword on his back. The train stops. We see sparks fly from the wheels of the train. Cut back to the massive train slowing down past the camera. The camera spins around to show two Shinra guards motion to each other. One goes one way, one goes the other way. The camera follows one of the guards inspecting the train, gun in hand. We hear some sounds of the other guard grunting or struggling off camera. The guard on camera hears and is alerted to this, and hurries toward the space between the train cars. He looks up and down. Biggs comes up behind the guard, puts his arm around his neck, and holding his arms. Jesse runs up and delivers a jump-turning sidekick to the Shinra guard's stomach or solar plexus. The guard buckles and falls down unconscious. Wedge jumps down from the train. All three start heading in the direction of the camera, which turns to show Barrett with sunglasses and his gun arm. The camera turns around Barrett, while Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse start heading the other way. Barrett walks in that direction, too, then turns around looking up at the train, saying, "Get down here, Merc," while motioning. We then see Cloud do a high-flying flip off the top of the train, landing in a half-kneel, hand-on-ground, Buster Sword outstretched position. "Okay, Mr. Cool." Getting up, he swings his sword, then puts it behind him on his back. With his hand still on his sword, he looks at the camera, or us. We see his Mako-colored blue eyes. Then the camera rotates around him, and the start of Chapter 1. Further thoughts on this scene. The original starts with the Mako, and with Aerith, showing that they are very important and central to the story. But Aerith is not the main character. Cloud is. I really like the zoom out from Aerith to the city of Midgar to Cloud. It's a very artistic, dynamic opening. Seeing it with HD graphics is especially impressive. The camera angles used in this remake and the small edition are all beautifully well done. No idea if the blackbird means anything in these opening establishing shots, but I literally have no complaints about this opening. 10 out of 10. All additions add to the immersion, setting, and story. I forgot to talk about the music. I'm not really an expert when it comes to music, but the opening song that leads into the bombing mission is exactly the same as the original, except orchestrated, and works absolutely beautifully. The song that occurs during the establishing shots of Midgar, on the other hand, is very subtle. It sounds a little bit like One-Winged Angel, which makes me wonder if it's hinting at something. Perhaps in the ending, perhaps. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but it is an interesting choice, and I don't really have any problems with that in the beginning here. I'll try to figure out a better format or structure for the next one. But yeah, please tell me what you think. Any feedback on this would be appreciated for anybody who watches this. And yeah, thank you for watching. See ya.